Imagine stepping onto a field of razor-sharp volcanic rock with absolutely nothing protecting your feet. The first few steps sting. The next few draw blood. By the time you've crossed the hillside, every movement hurts. Now imagine tomorrow you have to do it again. And the day after that. For most of human history, that wasn't a survival challenge. It was simply Tuesday. For millions of years, our ancestors walked barefoot. Across forests, through rivers, over scorching sand, across freezing plains. They climbed cliffs, crossed thorn-covered grasslands, and hunted animals that could easily outrun them. So here's the mystery. If humans managed perfectly well without shoes for so long, why invent them at all? The answer isn't simply because rocks hurt. It's far stranger than that. Because shoes didn't just protect our feet. They quietly changed where humans could live, how far they could travel, who they became, and eventually how entire civilizations saw themselves. But to understand why anyone wrapped something around their feet, we have to start with a pair of feet that looked surprisingly modern. Picture Eastern Africa around 2 million years ago. No cities, no roads, no sandals lying outside someone's hut. Just endless savannas stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there walks an early human. Not quite like us, but close enough that if you only saw their footprints pressed into soft mud, you might mistake them for your own. That's because our feet had already undergone one of evolution's greatest engineering projects. Unlike chimpanzees, whose feet work almost like extra hands, human feet became specialized machines built for distance. Our toes shortened, our arches formed, our heels strengthened. More than 24 bones, over 100 muscles and ligaments, all working together like a carefully tuned suspension bridge. Think about your car. Without shock absorbers, every tiny bump becomes exhausting. Your foot does that job every second you walk. Except evolution somehow built it from bone, tendon, and muscle. Not bad for something designed without blueprints. And for hundreds of thousands of years, it worked brilliantly. Barefoot wasn't a disadvantage. It was the default setting. In fact, many people today who grow up without shoes develop remarkably strong feet and natural walking patterns that researchers have studied with great interest, which creates another puzzle. If the human foot was already this effective, why change anything? The answer wasn't hiding beneath our feet. It was waiting thousands of kilometers away. Humans began leaving Africa, not all at once, not in one giant migration, more like countless generations slowly drifting into unfamiliar worlds. Each generation walked a little farther than the last. Imagine exploring a game map where nobody has unlocked the terrain. Every valley is unknown. Every mountain could hide food or disaster. Eventually, those travelers encountered environments their ancestors had never experienced. Frozen ground, sharp mountain scree, salt flats hot enough to burn skin, dense thorn bushes, volcanic landscapes. Suddenly, the perfectly evolved barefoot foot faced problems it had never been optimized to solve. Evolution is a brilliant engineer. It's also incredibly slow. If nature wants thicker skin, tougher soles, or different feet, it usually takes thousands of generations. Humans weren't interested in waiting. Instead, they cheated. Not with stronger feet, with technology. And that's one of humanity's greatest superpowers. When evolution hands us a problem, we often solve it by inventing something instead. Cold? Make fire. Darkness? Build lamps. Weak teeth? Cook food. Painful ground? Well, maybe wrap something around your feet. Simple. Except there's one enormous problem. We have almost no ancient shoes. That sounds impossible. People preserve dinosaur bones for millions of years. Why not shoes? Because early footwear was almost certainly made from the worst possible archaeological materials. Animal hide, grass, tree bark, plant fibers, leather. Imagine leaving a leather glove outside. Now come back in 20,000 years. Exactly. Organic materials rot. They disappear. Which means the earliest shoes left almost no direct evidence. It's like trying to reconstruct the history of paper airplanes. The airplanes vanished long ago. Only indirect clues remain. So archaeologists became detectives. Instead of searching for ancient shoes, They searched for ancient feet. And that's where things became unexpectedly clever. Around 40,000 years ago, something odd begins appearing in human skeletons. Toe bones become slightly different, especially the little toe. Earlier humans show signs that their toes gripped the ground constantly. Later humans, not as much. Researchers noticed those outer toes seemed less heavily built, almost as if they weren't working quite as hard anymore. One explanation: footwear. If a soft shoe holds your foot together, your toes don't grip the ground with the same force. Imagine wearing thick winter gloves. You can still move your fingers, but they stop doing all the tiny adjustments they'd normally make. Your feet behave similarly. This evidence doesn't prove exactly what those shoes looked like, but it strongly suggests something had changed. And then archaeology finally gave us an even bigger clue. Not the shoes themselves, their shadows. In France, inside caves where Ice Age people left magnificent paintings of horses, mammoths, and bison, researchers found footprints. Some appear surprisingly smooth. The toes aren't clearly visible, almost as though something soft covered the foot. Elsewhere, preserved impressions hint at wrapped footwear rather than completely bare skin. They're frustratingly incomplete. Archaeology often is. It's a little like reading a novel after someone ripped out 99% of the pages. Still, piece by piece, picture emerges. During the last ice age, humans were probably wearing simple footwear. Nothing fashionable, nothing decorative, just practical protection. Although practical may be generous. Early shoes were probably damp, heavy, smelly, and after enough rain, they may have weighed almost as much as a disappointed mammoth. Not exactly luxury footwear, but they worked, mostly. So what did these first shoes actually look like? Researchers believe many were little more than wrapped animal hides tied around the foot with leather strips. Others may have woven grasses into thick protective soles. Some Arctic groups later stuffed dry grass inside boots for insulation, essentially creating prehistoric socks, which, if you've ever forgotten wet socks inside hiking boots, you already know why replacing them regularly mattered. These weren't mass-produced. Every pair reflected local resources. Forest, use bark and fibers. Grassland, use animal skins. Cold regions, add fur facing inward. Hot deserts, maybe lighter woven materials. The invention wasn't one shoe. It was an idea. Protect the foot using whatever nature provides. Simple, adaptable, brilliant. And once humans discovered that principle, everything accelerated. Here's something we rarely think about. Shoes don't just protect feet. They expand geography. Picture standing before a frozen valley. Without footwear, every step risks frostbite. With insulated boots, suddenly the valley becomes reachable. Multiply that by thousands of generations. Entire continents become accessible. Humans spread across Europe during harsh ice age conditions, eventually into Siberia, then toward the land bridge connecting Asia and North America. Now, shoes alone didn't make those journeys possible. People also mastered clothing, shelter, fire, hunting, and cooperation. But footwear quietly joined that survival toolkit. It's one of those inventions nobody writes songs about. Yet civilization probably travels farther because of it. Think about that. Some of history's greatest migrations may have depended partly on something covering a person's toes. History can be surprisingly humble. Then something unexpected happened. Shoes stopped being only about survival. They became communication. Take ancient Egypt. Many ordinary people often walked barefoot, especially while working. But finely crafted sandals appeared among elites. Materials mattered. Decoration mattered. Who wore them mattered. In other words, your feet started introducing you before you even spoke. Mesopotamia developed leather footwear suited for different environments. The Greeks preferred elegant sandals. The Romans industrialized footwear on a scale few earlier societies imagined. Roman soldiers marched enormous distances wearing sturdy military sandals called calligi, each one built with layers of leather and metal studs underneath. Imagine hiking hundreds of kilometers carrying armor. Now imagine doing it barefoot. Exactly. Those sandals weren't fashion accessories. They were military technology. Sometimes the fate of an empire depends on surprisingly ordinary equipment. But fashion always sneaks into practical inventions. It's almost inevitable. Once everyone has something, someone wants a nicer version, then a more expensive version, then one that's completely impractical but impresses the neighbors. Humans are wonderfully predictable. Shoes became symbols of wealth, power, occupation, religion, status. Some cultures removed shoes before entering sacred spaces. Others created elaborate ceremonial footwear. In medieval Europe, ridiculously long pointed shoes became fashionable among nobles. Walking in them probably wasn't enjoyable, but they certainly announced, "I don't spend my day chasing sheep," which was apparently the point. Throughout history, footwear often said less about where you were going, and more about who you wanted others to think you were. Now here's where biology catches up again. Modern researchers studying barefoot populations discovered something fascinating. People who spend their lives barefoot often develop stronger foot muscles, broader forefeet, and different walking mechanics than people raised in rigid shoes. That doesn't mean shoes are bad. Far from it. Modern footwear protects against hazards our ancestors never faced. Glass, concrete, industrial workplaces, sports injuries, freezing sidewalks. But it reminds us that the human foot remains incredibly adaptable. It's a biological machine constantly responding to how it's used. Think of it like learning a musical instrument. Ignore it completely and certain abilities fade. Practice regularly, and new strengths emerge. Our feet quietly adapt beneath us every day. Most of us simply never notice. Of course, shoes kept evolving. Leather became softer. Needles improved stitching. Rubber transformed comfort. Factories made footwear affordable. Athletic shoes introduced cushioning, foam, synthetic fabrics, and designs informed by biomechanics. Some modern running shoes contain more engineering than early airplanes, which sounds exaggerated, until you realize entire laboratories now study how humans take a single step. Pressure sensors, motion capture, computer simulations, all focused on something our ancestors solved with strips of animal hide and determination. Progress has a strange sense of humor. But here's the biggest twist of all. Humans didn't invent shoes because our feet failed. Our feet were extraordinary. We invented shoes because our ambitions outgrew our biology. We wanted to cross sharper mountains, colder landscapes, longer distances, new continents. Evolution built remarkable feet. Human imagination asked them to do even more. And whenever biology reached its limits, culture stepped in. That's a pattern you'll see again and again across history. Our ancestors couldn't grow thicker fur, so they made clothing. They couldn't evolve claws, so they crafted tools. They couldn't redesign their feet overnight, so they wrapped them. Civilization is, in many ways, the story of borrowing abilities evolution never had time to give us. Next time you slip on your shoes, pause for a second. They're easy to ignore. You probably won't remember tying your laces tomorrow morning. But hidden inside that ordinary routine is a story stretching back tens of thousands of years. A story of Ice Age hunters crossing frozen valleys, of travelers leaving Africa one careful step at a time, of craftspeople weaving grass into sauls, of Roman soldiers marching across continents, of children leaving footprints that archaeologists would one day study like detectives examining clues from a vanished world. Your shoes aren't just clothing. They're one of humanity's oldest promises to itself. A quiet promise that no matter how rough the ground becomes, we'll find a way to keep walking.